Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. Today I'm going to talk about the tropical zodiac in the Southern Hemisphere. I had a couple questions, actually I had two questions about this week, and when I get the same question repeatedly, what that tells me is that I need to either create a web page or do a video to do a detailed in-depth explanation. Um, and this comes up from time to time. This is something I've been sort of peripherally aware of. I mean, I'm in Iowa. I'm in the United States, the Northern Hemisphere, so it's not a existential problem for me. Um, but it's interesting because the people that raise it, they seem to be looking for the right answer. A lot of times, I mean, this is obviously not true of everybody, but there does seem to be a tendency that people are sort of on a crusade to save everyone from the scourge of the tropical zodiac, sort of saying, you have to justify this to me, you have to convince me, this is something that's, and what they're often most upset about is that nobody can give them a coherent explanation. So I guess to me this is a little bit of an odd reaction. I mean, if you don't like it, don't use it. But again, accord other people the same choice. I mean, this is a question of really of tolerance. I mean, what we're going to really get into in this video is really that it's legitimate to follow different worldviews or to have different models. Um, what I'm going to go ahead and do is to explain a potential basis for using the tropical zodiac in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, actually, this always seems to be Australians. I've never had any ones from South America worry about it. But I want to be very clear on what I'm doing here. I'm not arguing that this is the right answer. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just going to give a potential basis, see if it resonates. If it does, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. And I think that's really the point here is that there is, it is possible to have different ways of looking at this question. And just because someone disagrees with you or has a different view, that doesn't mean they're wrong or it's illegitimate in some way. So it's interesting because as this comes up, this questions about the tropical zodiac, it doesn't seem to be coming up in a practical context. I haven't had people come to me and say, as students say, I took your orrery course and it's just completely useless. It doesn't work at all. I can't make sense out of it. Or natal saying, I looked at natal charts and none of them makes any sense. I can't do any prediction with it. It doesn't work at all. What it seems to be is an objection on a sort of philosophical or from a worldview basis. It's like it doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. Therefore, it doesn't work. Or I have an objection to it. And that's sort of an interesting approach. So I have to say that I have a certain amount of sympathy to people that are saying, no one can give you an explanation. And it kind of reminds me of when I was a kid and I'd ask people about religion. And I quickly learned not to do that because people could never give a coherent explanation of it. They would just get emotional about it and get upset. And I think this comes about because most people are not at all worried about how things work or about causality. They have no idea what their worldview is, and they're constantly doing things, that are contradictory. I'll talk a little bit more about atheism and materialism, but that's a view that nothing is except matter and energy. People are saying nothing is except matter and energy. That's their underlying view, yet they're doing magic or astrology or spiritual subjects like that. Doesn't make a lot of sense. At the same time, you don't want to fall into the trap of automatically rejecting everything that doesn't fit your worldview. If things are happening that don't fit your worldview, maybe your worldview needs to be revised as opposed to trying to edit out the evidence. So what I'm going to try to do in this video is to kind of take a middle path, be aware of worldview, work in harmony with our worldview, but then question our worldview if it doesn't accord with our experience. So if we're looking at the tropical zodiac, the objection seems to come about from the idea that the physical seasons are the source of the tropical zodiac, and therefore if the seasons don't correspond to the zodiac, it doesn't work. So let's talk a little bit more about what the tropical zodiac is. A zodiac is essentially what makes something in astrology. I mean, if you have Chinese astrology, Vedic astrology, the Western astrology, which has had its origin in Babylonia, they all have in common a zodiac. Zodiac is a 360-degree circle, and it allows for very precise, positioning of things. If something's at 21 Aries, we know exactly where it is, and we can see, like, for example, how many degrees it is away from other celestial objects. We can do aspects. We can do all sorts of useful things with it. You can see its current position, future position, things like that. Extremely important. The origin of the zodiac the tropical zodiac was in the 12 constellations that lay in the path of the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun as it moved through the sky. They don't correspond to the constellations because they're very irregular. And so the signs are 12 degrees, 30 degrees each, and the tropical zodiac is oriented to the seasons. So what that means is that on the first day of spring, and that's when the weatherman says this is the first day of spring, what he's saying is that the sun is going to Aries, but they're not gonna say that. So the sun goes into Aries which is the beginning of the zodiac, on the spring equinox, and then goes into Cancer on the summer solstice, and then goes into Libra at the autumnal equinox, and then goes into Capricorn at the winter solstice. So we've got this very logical approach. I mean, the seasons are pretty obvious. It's not crazy to have it oriented to the seasons, and that is the underlying basis of the tropical zodiac. So what that does is a lot of the meaning of signs comes from where they are in the zodiac. So Aries is in spring, so it's growth, rapid change, hot, things like that. So a lot of it is seasonal in basis. So like I said, this idea seems to be that since the physical seasons were the source of the zodiac, if the seasons don't correspond to the zodiac, then the whole thing, you have to throw it all out the window. And I guess you'd use a constellational zodiac, which is one that corresponds to the quote physical stars, the real stars. That's certainly popular as a theoretical. Again, this is something that people argue about on social media. They like to talk about and pontificate about, but it can't be used in actual astrology. I mean, the whole system is based on tropical zodiac. It's very root part of traditional astrology and modern astrology as well. It's a bit like saying, I reject the major scale. I'm not going to play any music on a major scale. I have to use a Mixolydian mode or something, or raga scales, and yet I'm still going to try to play Bach. It's absolutely impossible. It's like, if as a practical matter, if you throw out the tropical zodiac, you're basically not going to be able to do much astrology at all, and you lose a lot of the meaning, a lot of the underlying purpose of it. But again, that doesn't deter people because they have, like I said, a worldview or philosophical objection to it. So the root for rejecting it philosophically or worldview really is atheistic materialism. And atheistic materialism is just the predominant view of reality nowadays, which is that nothing really exists except matter and energy. So if there is a cause of something, it must be an energetic and material cause. In other words, and the highest truth comes from corresponding to material reality. If you want to know if something's true or not, you check material reality. That's it. Again, and that's the focus on the constellational zodiac. I mean, that's what I feel like about this whole Southern Hemisphere tropical zodiac thing. It's just a variation of, oh, you can't use the tropical zodiac because it doesn't correspond to the real stars, in other words, the material stars. Because obviously that's reality. Obviously it has to be matter as the highest reality, the highest truth. There must be some kind of beams or something. We don't know what it is, but that's all it could be. And therefore, if you don't correspond to material reality, then you are, it's not, it doesn't work. So a couple problems. Rejecting individual parts of astrology like the tropical zodiac based on atheistic materialism doesn't make any sense because astrology itself violates atheistic materialism. There is zero scientific evidence for the causality of astrology. It doesn't work through magnetism. It doesn't work through sunspots, etc., etc. And trying to talk about symbolism or synchronicity just dodges the issue. What is the causality? Okay? And there's, like I said, no scientific proof for any kind of material energetic cause of astrology. In order for astrology to work, there must be an underlying spiritual connection of all things. And that's, again, violates atheistic materialism. So to say, oh, I don't like the tropical zodiac, but I'm still going to do astrology, again, very illogical. Problem number 2, astrology does appear to work in the Southern Hemisphere. Like I said, I haven't had anyone come back and say, oh, it doesn't work at all. I took your course and it's completely not working. So that's another practical problem, is that reality itself appears to be predictable through using the tropical zodiac in traditional astrology or modern astrology in the Southern Hemisphere. A third problem that came up as I was thinking about this was that there's this idea that, I mean, if you think about, there's many different kinds of seasons. And the paradigmatic season that we're using in the Northern Hemisphere is a spring, summer, winter, fall. Those are actually quite different. I mean, you think of spring, we're in spring right now. We had a lot of rain. The temperatures, maybe 60s, 70s. things start sprouting up, they start growing. Summer is different. Summer is hotter, often drier, and then you've got the fall where again, can be rainy again, it's cooler, the leaves in deciduous forests, the leaves fall, and then winter, we've got snow, there's ice, snow on the ground, things like that. This is a very specific rhythm, this four-part, basically, looking at the seasons. This is not true of seasons throughout the world. And I was just looking up in Australia, and they say Northern Australia, they said it's got a wet and a dry season. And that's very typical of equatorial countries, in places near the equator. They don't have a lot of seasonal variation. They typically will have, again, the same amount of days and nights. Instead of like in our seasonal stuff, we have much longer days in the summertime and shorter days in the wintertime. They don't have that, and they're warm year-round, and they have a rainy and dry season. India is even another variation on that. It has three distinct seasons. It has winter, summer, and the monsoon. Summer is March to May, monsoon is June to October, and winter is November to February. The monsoon is when the rains come in, this huge amount of rain, storms come in, and there's all this water, and it waters everything. So, again, I haven't had people saying, oh, I'm in a tropical zone in the Northern Hemisphere, and the season isn't a four-part season, therefore the zodiac doesn't work. Okay? So if it's totally seasonally based, then you're going to have a lot of different kinds of astrology. You're going to have 10 different zodiacs to match the seasons properly. But that doesn't seem to be true. It seems that, in the northern, haven't had people saying in the equator or in, India north of the equator that we can't use the tropical zodiac. So ultimately what I would posit is that if you're not using an atheistic materialistic worldview, if you have a spiritual worldview, that the spiritual exists, and this is typical of most traditional societies, then the seasons reveal an underlying spiritual order. Okay, and this underlying spiritual order is the ultimate cause of the seasons, but it's much broader. There's many, many similar cycles. Okay, so if you think about this seasonal cycle, that's a cycle of the year: spring, summer, winter, fall. Interestingly enough, you've also got the day cycle. You've got dawn, noon, afternoon, and night, which very much corresponds to that spring, summer, winter, fall season. And then you have the typical life cycle, which again is very similar: birth, growth, death. So really what you're looking is these are actually very similar cycles. And so when you see an individual manifestation of one of those cycles, like the seasons, it reveals the underlying cycle. But if we look through that individual manifestation, we can see the underlying cycle, you could even characterize it as a Platonic idea, underlying relationship. We can then take that knowledge and experience and use it for other individual manifestations. So we're not limited because we noticed it from the seasonal cycle to just that particular seasonal cycle. We can see the underlying spiritual cycle and apply it to other things. And again, the signs are used for many things. They're mapped to the body. I think it's zodiacal man, mapped to locations, cities, and countries. Really what the zodiac is a universal tool for astrological patterning that, again, reveals these underlying spiritual cycles that control things on Earth. So again, there's a logic. It's like, yes, it came from the Northern Hemisphere seasonal cycle, but it can be used in any seasonal cycle. That you're not limited to that. And you could have a similar thing if you had an Australia is where the astrology was developed. That Australian cycle would see the underlying spiritual reality that was manifesting in the Northern Hemisphere as well. It's not limited to that. Because again, it's not as if they're having some kind of spiritual spring energy that is controlling the cycle or something like that. I don't see that causality at all, And I think by insisting on an atheistic materialistic approach without understanding the causality, that's problematic in terms of this. So what this view does is I think it give a more coherent approach. But that's what I think. Again, other people are going to come along and say, no, it makes more sense to not use this cycle. We can do something else. But that's what I would say ultimately is that it's your choice, or rather the choice of your worldview, right? Because what's really happening here is that it's interesting. No one's coming up with an individual question here. What they're doing is they have a specific worldview that they're in. They have models, they have information they've been exposed to, and that automatically produces this question. Just like my response. My response is not some kind of individual thing I came up with on my own, but really is a product of the worldview that I have, the models that I'm working with, and then the experiences and training that I've had as a a traditional astrologer and the rest of my sort of spiritual quest. So that's what I would really urge people to do, is just say, be aware of what your worldview is, be aware of what your models are, and then see how well those models correspond to reality. But ultimately, you're going to have a preference. You're going to be drawn to something that resonates for you. That's fine, but allow other people to do that and recognize that there's a legitimacy to other people's views. I mean, I don't, if someone wants to say, like I said, reject the tropical zodiac, that's their, I mean, I'm not going to say that they're wrong, in an objective sense. It's really much of a choice. They have to find what resonates for them. So again, grant everybody else that same privilege, be tolerant, be understanding, and then we can, then we can move forward with it. Because the anger, the being upset about it, or the lack of knowledge, this all can be problematic. So I think that's useful. I enjoyed thinking about this as an issue. The seasonality stuff was interesting to me too, with the different places that you have different types of seasons. I think that's all kind of a grist for the mill, something to think about, and I hope you all think deeply about it and be able to have a better view of your own, and ultimately come to the choice that resonates best for you.